Hey everyone, and welcome back to today's video. So earlier this year I set myself 5 reading goals. I made a video talking about what those goals were, and halfway through the year I sort of did a little mini check-in on those goals and decided to review them and change them. In that video I also spoke about doing a video on each goal and how I'm getting along with those. Never ended up doing that because I thought I would just do it at the end of the year when it was just a better time, a long time had passed, and I could actually fully talk about them. So the first video that I'm going to do in terms of revisiting my goals is sort of my experience reading sci-fi so far this year. One of my goals was to read more sci-fi books. I didn't ever quantify it because I know me low-key that if I didn't read any, then reading one more would at least still have been more. Actually technically that's a lie, it would have been reading 2 more, would have been more. So this video is the first of those 5 goals. I will do a video on the other goals that I set myself, but I feel like this video is the one, this goal is one that I have the most to say. Because it's the goal that I completely feel like I smashed, that I really took the time to listen to the recommendations I was given and read some other stuff from that my boyfriend has, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. So the first thing I'm going to do is get stuck in on some stats for you so you can just sort of see what my reading habits were last year versus what they are now. So far at the time of filming this I have read 65 books so far this year, which is astounding to me because last year I read 55 books. I don't care about the number of books I read, I was just pleasantly surprised that it had increased, but I think that's because of audiobooks, but I will talk more about that in my end of year wrap up. But yeah, I have read 65 books so far this year, and 18 of those books have been books that can be classed as science fiction. Basically, that is 28% of what I have read this year. 28% of the books I have read this year have been science fiction books. Now, to me, that sounds like a huge amount, and it's even more comparable when you compare it to last year. Last year, I read 1 science fiction book, and it was actually The Growing Season by Helen Sedgwick, and that is actually the book that put me onto wanting to read science fiction. The plot in that story, whilst the book didn't go the way I wanted, the plot in it and the idea sort of for me made me think, actually, maybe I'd like a bit of science fiction. So yes, so I think last year it said I read 55 books, and I think that put it a percentage, basically 2% of my reading was science fiction last year. So 28% versus 2%. It's a huge increase, so obviously I'm really proud of myself for reaching that goal. There was never a number on it, but I feel like I have done it justice. So what I'm going to do now is talk about the 18 science fiction books that I read. They're not going to be huge reviews, I'm just going to sort of do 1 or 2 sentences and whether I like them or didn't like them. So the first 3 are actually graphic novels. The first one was Saga, which can also be classed as fantasy. Enjoyed it, haven't actually picked up the rest since, mainly because out of the books that I buy, I felt like the price point for the graphic novel was quite expensive. So I keep saying this, I'm going to join my local library and hopefully they will have it there. The other 2 was the Monstress graphic novel, so I read volume 1 and volume 2, which can also be classed as steampunk. I really liked them. The illustrations, the artwork were beautiful, they were dark, they were gory. It's a very sort of violent graphic novel, but I really enjoyed it. And yeah, not sure the science fiction element is for me. It's very much ghosts and talking cats and wandering and stuff like that, but it's the artwork that makes this for me. The 4th book that I went on to read this year was Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor, and I also went on to read later on in the year her Binti trilogy, so that's Binti, Binti Home and Binti the Night Masquerade. Right, Nnedi Okorafor is a author that I hear a lot about from people who have read her. They really love her, couldn't bloody stand her books, I'm not gonna lie. I will never be picking up another book by her, which makes me really sad because I can see right there on my boyfriend's shelf he has a book called The Book of the Phoenix. He didn't like that book either, but I just didn't like her writing, I just didn't. Who Fears Death was just so annoying, the trope in it was so annoying with this chosen one trope, and it was just a girl who had an immense lot of power. So this also sort of borderlines with fantasy as well, has an immense lot of power, and it just seems there is nothing she can't do. And the storyline for me wasn't it, the execution wasn't it. It was just basically me reading a girl travelling through the desert for a really long time and then ending up, succeeding in her goal. The Binti trilogy I just couldn't stand. The Binti, so novellas are quite good for obviously dipping your toe into something and really enjoying it, or just getting a taste for it, I guess, because I did not enjoy it, so I don't know why I said that. The Binti trilogy, I found in the case of the first one, it was too much packed into a novella. There was just too much happening. What actually ended up happening you know, there ended up being a sort of massacre on a group of people. And there just seemed to be no sort of punishment for the people who actually carried out that massacre. And Binti, throughout these 3 books, is kind of hailed as this sort of hero chosen one trope again. And I wasn't really here for it because it just didn't make sense to me. So I also went on to read Binti Home, which I actually liked more than Binti, because I ended up giving it like a 2 out of 5, whereas Binti I gave 1. And then Binti the Night Masquerade, I didn't even finish. I got halfway through and I was like, why am I choosing to force myself to struggle? I wasn't enjoying the book, and personally for me, her writing, what she writes about, are just not for me. And I think one of the main things that I will say about Binti is the fact that there are just jellyfish floating around, and I'm just like, I'm not really here for this. Like, that sort of allowed me to explore my boundaries as to what I liked and wanted from science fiction, and it wasn't that. Like, I'm not really here for that. So the next book I actually went on to read is Earth Abide, and this is science fiction, but it's more like apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic. Again, I'm not a person who's interested in zombie films, any of those post-apocalyptic films. I'm not, like, they do not interest me, they scare me in fact. This one was quite nice because it's not about the disease and it killing other people, it's just more about rebuilding civilization after that, and the sort of lineage of the family, and how, you know, you set rituals, how you set goals, how you set basically new ways of living, especially because he was living in America and it obviously reached, I think it was up to the 21st century. So it was about the fact that his kids were now essentially going backwards because they didn't have what he had growing up. So that was interesting. Didn't really enjoy it that much, but I liked what it explored. I then went on to read the Dark Eden series. I actually heard about Dark Eden from Mark Nash. He was talking about this book and it just sounded really good to me, so I asked my boyfriend if he had it, and luckily he did, and he actually ended up having the whole series. I don't know if that's just now blocked me out, but yeah. And truly a book that I enjoyed. Like, one of the highlights of my year was reading this book, and definitely one of my highlights from science fiction reading. The other 2 I really could have done without reading. What is this one? This one, we could just chuck this in the bin, or we won't actually, but please, if you read this trilogy, please don't read these. You can read these as standalones because they're whilst they're connected, they're all set in the same world. The stories are all independent of each other, and you can read this as a closed book and finish. This wasn't too bad, but again, I could have done without it. This definitely could have done without it. And the reason why I fell so hard for Dark Eden was because of the worlds that Chris Beckett created. So this is talking about a population of people, so basically 3 men, 1 woman, go off in a spaceship to another planet, which to me is just the start of, I don't want to read this. But you don't hear that. What you're hearing from is these descendants that are on this planet, and you see that they are sort of, every year they have an anniversary where they pay homage to their founders, and it's just so interesting to hear about the rituals that they've created for themselves, what they have taken from the Earth people, and it's just so interesting to see like the sort of things that we've carried out on a day-to-day basis, how they now carry it out. They're quite small, like tribes or civilizations really, and it's just so interesting to see the build-up of rituals, of communities, of schools. It's just so interesting to see it built up from that sort of very small thing. And I think that's what I liked about it. I also like the sort of ecosystem that he had built. The book is down here now, it's not here. I liked the ecosystem that he had built in terms of this planet. There was no like light source on this planet, it was a dark planet. So the only light source really was from these animals, I can't remember what they called now, like beetle bugs or something, that had essentially torches on their head. And you don't really realise until the last book the fact that these people are basically blind. They can't really actually see very well because the planet's really dark. I didn't really think about that until it was revealed later. But I just like the world building in this. I thought the world building in this was so unique. It was something I had never read before, and I think that's probably the magic I think that I was looking for when I wanted to read science fiction, to get new ideas, a new way of thinking, something that I just never would have come across in my normal fiction reading. So yeah, that's what made it really quite special to me. Mother of Eden is the second book in the trilogy, and this just focuses on some of the descendants many years later. I've already talked a lot about Dark Eden in this series, so I don't really want to talk about the plot so deeply here. But essentially in Dark Eden, we have our one character, John, who essentially breaks away from the main family because he is tired of where they are, and it also brings to light that sort of whole world of leaders and followers and sort of breaking away from the rules, and how do you make a society progressive? You keep on doing the same thing. There's so much interesting commentary here, especially when it gets to Daughter of Eden and Mother of Eden, because the two characters are female led, so there's a lot of commentary there about the sort of what happens to the tribe once they letting women lead and when they let men lead and all those sorts of things. It's a very interesting book. The first one is just by far the best. The other two just don't compare. So after the trilogy of Dark Eden, that's when I actually read the sort of Binti trilogy stuff, and then I actually went on to read another trilogy. It was all the trilogies. So that trilogy was the Sleeping Giants trilogy. I read the first two on my Kindle and then ended up purchasing the last book. Big mistake, should have just purchased the first book and again never read the second two books. But this was a trilogy that really surprised me. The first book in this trilogy is one of those books that if you described it to me, I'd be like, get that away from me, I'm not reading that. And I really need to give a huge shout out to one of my subscribers who, when I talked about my goals for this year, took the time to leave me such a huge comment detailing so many books that I should read, and they were like recommendations that she thought I would like, rather than like, okay, you want to read science fiction, read these books. And I can't thank her enough because a lot of the books that you see me reading are because of her. So yes, thank you. Her name is Vaughan. Well, that's not her name, that's her YouTube name. But yes, she put me onto so many books I should read, and I still have loads more to go through her list. And I'm pretty sure one of these was one of them. The Sleeping Giants was one of them. Saga was, Binti was, and I don't know if the rest were. Oh no, and Octavia Butler, who I'm going to come on to later. So anyway, this is the final book in the trilogy, but the first book in the trilogy is Sleeping Giants, the second is Walking Gods, and this one is Only Human. I have to say I freaking love the titles of these books. Like, I think they completely encompass what each book is about. I know titles are meant to do that, but sometimes you have titles and they make absolutely no sense and you're just like, what are you talking about? But these completely encompass them. Anyway, Sleeping Giants is the first book and it is by far my favourite. Essentially, there is a scientist working and she stumbles, when she's younger, she falls into a hand. Many years later, she ends up working on this hand because she realises while she's working on it that it's actually a piece of something. It's the hand to a robot. And therefore, in her story, they go around finding the pieces for this robot and joining it together. I just, like, if somebody explained that to me, I'd be like, that sounds dumb. But I was just so enthralled in the story. I really loved seeing where they found the stuff, how they were putting together, like just how the mind was working to put this thing together. But also how they were thinking, like, where is this from? What is this thing going to do? So it was just a very, like, it was a concept that I thought I wouldn't like, and then I ended up really loving it, because then she gets to work with other people from like the US Marshal, the US Navy and stuff like that, where they pull together people they think have certain types of talent that might be able to work on a project like this. I think it was also that element that I liked in it. Walking Gods is an interesting one because essentially they've built the robot, they find out that there's like kind of more of these robots, and that these robots essentially start coming to London and other parts of the world and basically walking the world, and it's a little bit terrifying. I'm skimming a lot of the plot because I'm just not trying to ruin this for people, and I'm not trying to have this video to be very long. And Only Human is by far my least favourite in this trilogy. Oh my god, I wish I never read it. This book is essentially about a dad and a daughter fighting. Like, that's all I took away from this book. And I can tell you what happens at the back. 10 years ago, alien robots came to the Earth, killing 100 million people, so this is kind of a spoiler for the second one, but it's not, because if you read the back then you'll know it. Then they took the team away to an alien planet, and now they brought them back, and what you're hearing basically is you're getting flashbacks to what happened, and just this dad and their daughter are fighting because she wanted to stay on that planet, he wanted her to come back to Earth. She was like 10 when they took her to that other planet, so she spent a good part of her life somewhere else. And yeah, this was just so unenjoyable, and I managed to never read it again, so I'm just going to put it here. But it was very much an enjoyable trilogy for me. I really liked it. Again, I was just finding with the trilogy thing that it was only the first book that was really good. It seemed to be like they had this really cool idea, but then it must be really hard to execute the rest. So, moving on to the next 4 books. The 15th book that I read that can be classed as science fiction is The Tea Master and the Detective. I've spoken about this in a couple of videos now. I just really like this. Can actually be classed as, I guess, fantasy maybe. It's also basically a retelling of Sherlock Holmes. I actually heard about this from Jean on Jean's Bookish Thoughts, and basically it's a reimagining of Sherlock Holmes, where Holmes is the... What is Holmes? A person? No, sorry, wow, how did I forget that? Holmes is a ship and Sherlock is an actual woman. And this is set in, like, I think it's set in China, I'm not too sure. It's around sort of that part of the world. And it's just a beautiful story. It's the words and the atmosphere that it creates that I really, really liked. I didn't actually pick this up specifically because it was science fiction. I picked it up because of the retelling of Sherlock Holmes in this unique way. Ended up thoroughly enjoying it. The boat, the ship, so it's not a boat, it's a ship, like a floating ship in space, is a tea master, so a tea sort of brewer who brews teas, which is essentially medicines to help people with various ailments. And then the tea master, well, that's the tea master, the detective is obviously Sherlock Holmes. And essentially they solve a crime, but it's a crime in space. But it's cool, it's really cool, I really liked it. I like the idea, the sort of space theme and anything. It didn't really ruin it for me, especially because this was just like, I say people, like the rest of the characters were people apart from the floating ship. The next book I'm going to talk about is Before the Coffee Gets Cold. Now, I actually got this as a NetGalley release and didn't realise it was classed as science fiction, but I know why it's classed as science fiction, but I would say it's very loosely science fiction. It's because it has a time travel element in this, and I spoke about this in a review one of my books. It was an okay book, it just really lacked any sort of punch, any sort of, I don't know, anything in it. But it's essentially about a coffee shop that allows people to travel back in time to revisit a moment that has already passed. They can't change it, they can't do anything, but they can just simply go back and revisit that moment and sort of talk to that person. But whatever they do will not change the present, it doesn't alter it at all. And the reason why the book is called Before the Coffee Gets Cold, they have to be there for a certain amount of time and they have to have finished their coffee before it gets cold, otherwise I think they get stuck in the past, I'm not really too sure. And you just follow 5 different stories, 5 people who come into this cafe, and one of them is actually one of the people who works in the cafe, so it's really nice. Like, it has a nice sort of unity to it, but it just lacked any sort of punch. It was very lackluster for me, but yes, it definitely counts as a science fiction book with that time travel element, but it wasn't heavily focused on that, so I guess that's why I didn't actually realise it at first. The final book I'm going to speak about, I'm not really sure you can actually see this because the light is very bright, is Seed to Harvest, which contains 4 novels by Octavia E. Butler, Wild Seed, Mind of My Mind, Plays Arc, and Patternmaster. As of yet, I have only read Wild Seed and Mind of My Mind, so I have 2 more to go. And truly, I am blown away by this book. Or these series of books, I'm really only blown away by one of them, but it's the ideas that are coming through in this that I really like. One thing I will say is, these books I don't think were actually ever written together as a series, because the publication dates of these books are, like, these books have been put in a certain order, but some of these books were published before. Mind of My Mind was by far my favourite in this. Wild Seed is sort of, I guess, a precursor to Mind of My Mind, but it was written after. I'm going to read the back of this book because I think it will definitely explain much more about what the whole collection is about, and then I can sort of talk briefly about the 2 books. It says, now collected for the first time in 1 volume, these 4 novels take readers on a wondrous odyssey from mythic primordial past to a fantastic far future. In ancient Africa, a female demigod of nurture and fertility mates with a powerful, destructive male entity. Together they birth a race of madmen, visionaries and psychics who cling to civilization's margins and back alleys for millennia, coming together in a telepathic pattern just as Earth is consumed by a cosmic invasion. Now these new beginnings, no longer merely human, will battle to rule the transfigured world. So in Wild Seed, what you have is the female demigod and the powerful, destructive male entity. He's essentially chasing it. It's essentially a story of man and woman, and a man trying to get a woman to submit to him. She is the Wild Seed because she is not part of his family. He has been for years and years and years and years. He cannot die, has been growing a family. So, someone that's like him, that won't really be humans, who'll just die. And he somehow found her, and because she is out of his realm and sort of out of his family that he built, she is the Wild Seed and he cannot tame her. And it's really interesting, she can do things that he can't do. I mean, loads of his children can do things that he can't do, but you know, even though he's very super powerful and he cannot die, neither can she really. One of her powers is that she's able to heal herself. So whatever happens, she is able to heal herself. Obviously, she has to do it in time. So that's essentially what that story is. It's about them sort of being with each other, not being with each other, and her just learning about a new world because she was living in Africa and then he took her to America, which was like very old back then. Like I say very old, it was like essentially going back into slavery time. So it was really interesting to see how like that was done as well. There's a lot of like sort of the ability to shapeshift and become other people. So it's very like sort of magical in that sense. But I really didn't mind that because it just felt quite grounded. It didn't feel like it was complete epic fantasy. Mind of My Mind is probably the strongest one and the most beautiful one because it's the idea, it's the subtlety, it's the, I don't know, it's the vision, it's beautiful. Mind of My Mind, essentially our male god, Joro, has managed to breed his like one person that he thinks, yes, this is it, and her power is immense, and through her power she's essentially able to create what they call the pattern, and the pattern is essentially locking people together. And it's a very interesting one because I think it's something you can view in very different ways. It's locking people together, essentially building a community, but it's very interesting. When you build a community, people don't want to feel like they are forced to be there, but maybe after a while they get used to it. So I think it pulled into question really the case of, you know, communities, should people come willingly or should people be sort of forced, and then eventually they sort of get used to it and they think actually this isn't too bad. You know, there's kind of morals and ethics thrown into there. But for me it was the subtle idea because something happens and she's able to pull from the community, and I think there's this idea in there that, you know, you're able to find your strength through other people. I think there are so many ways to take this. Me and my boyfriend have been chatting about this, and some of the things he says I've not realised. So there's just so many sort of subtle ideas in here. I just thought in the end it was beautiful, just sort of being able to have other people around you and learning the importance of having people on your side, building a team, and just generally being nice to each other. But alongside the amazing sort of powers that these lot have, it was stunning. It was a bit like Misfits, but not Misfits. If you ever watch Misfits in the UK, you might know what I'm talking about. And it's just stunning. So there are 2 other books in here that I haven't read, but I'm probably going to give them a read next year. So after talking through 18 books that I read, wow, why did I do that? I just want to talk about what my highlights were, and basically there were 4 books that stood out for me this year that I'm just like, wow. And that was Dark Eden, Sleeping Giants, The Tea Master and the Detective, and Mind of My Mind. By far, 4 of the best science fiction books that I have read this year. I can't say anything more really. In terms of what I'm actually going to do for this goal, I kept thinking about this, and really, I haven't really sat down to think about what my goals might be for 2020, but what I'm hoping is science fiction, reading books and stuff like that will become a natural part of my sort of go-to books that I naturally select. I still have a lot of the books that Vampyrox recommended me to read, to go through, so I'm going to go through those because I feel like they have been sort of selected for me, and I sort of want to get through them and discover new favourites, and then I guess slowly make sure that I'm being mindful of the books that I like. Yeah, I'm just not sure what I'm going to do in terms of the goal, if it's going to be something that falls into my 2020 goals, but overall I just wanted to say that my experience reading science fiction has been wonderful. I'm still like, you know, not that much clearer on the different parts of science fiction. Like I've obviously had a taste through reading this, but you can never be like, hey Sandra, like recommend me a science fiction book, because I would be like, I don't know, I only know what I've read. But it's been a really enjoyable experience, and I think that is the whole point. That is the whole point of reading, being able to like live in a different world, and experience many different emotions. And in some of these books I have been legit just living in a different world. Like I feel like obviously with fiction you live so many lives, you live through different characters, whereas in these books I'm legit just like maybe on planet Earth, maybe in a different planet, but it's, yeah, you're on a different planet, you're living complete different lives, and it's just so interesting to see, and it's so fascinating. But yeah, I hope this video was interesting. I just really wanted to talk about, I guess, what the experience has been like for me. I think it's probably really important to set yourself goals, but then also look back and see if they have been helpful, and yeah, this has been very helpful. So yeah, like I said, there are 4 other goals that I set myself. I think this video is by far going to be the longest video, because the rest I don't have as much to say, quite frankly. some of them I'll have nothing to say. But we'll find out when I sit down to film those videos. But thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments, or if you want to speak about any of sort of the goals that you might have set yourself this year, or goals that you didn't really set yourself but you ended up finding that you read more in one genre than the other, I would love to chat about this with you in the comments. So yeah, just leave me a comment and I will catch you on my next video. Bye!